Here. So thanks everyone for being here and for your years of participation and thought exchange and expertise and advocacy around the issue of ensuring our students and staff have clean, healthy, safe air in their school buildings. And while I think we are making progress, there's still more work to be done. And I'm really grateful for everyone who has been a part of this work so far. Um, I think we can feel free to have this be like a somewhat informal conversation about all these items on our agenda today, just because it's been such a long time. If there are specific things within the scope uh, of responsibilities for this working group you think that are still outstanding and you would like for us to focus on. I hope you'll feel comfortable sharing those so that we can make a plan for what to prioritize as we go forward in this work. And feel free. I don't want to put anyone on the spot, but feel free to uh, chime in if there's anything top of mind or things you think that just aren't clear yet.
I think just wanted to say hello, and I always appreciate you guys bringing the school nurse perspective in there because we know it affects, the health and safety. I just appreciate all the thoughtfulness and the ideas from this group. So I just want to say hello again.
Thank you. Thank you for that. My mom was a school nurse in an elementary school. And I is certainly familiar with the kiddos who struggle with respiratory issues as frequent visitors. And so I can imagine how important this issue is to you personally, but also school nurses as a coalition. So thank you for being a part of this work.
Absolutely. Have to agree with that. Have to second that. And then obviously just wanted to thank you and the senator for making the time to have this conversation. I think as I look through the list of tasks, the recommendations that are included in the law, some of these are pretty straightforward. And then some of them kind of touch on very, very technical. And so as I look through them, I mean, there's everything ranging from criteria from the rating for rating the priority of HVAC repair needs, best practices, benchmarks, these kinds of things. So some of these are very, very technical. And I don't claim to have the expertise to know how to answer some of them, but perhaps kind of going through them in a comprehensive way and putting together, at least we had thought that going through them and putting together kind of a work plan to tackle whatever's left of them might be a good way to do this. But that's just a thought.
I think part of the reason this came up as an agenda item is because when the legislation was originally passed, we were charged as the working group with certain tasks. And I think now that the program has rolled out and people are doing the 1-year studies and have already started on their 5-year and will be really getting into the 5-year as of January 1st, it's probably a good time to take stock about where we are, where we've come, and the work that we have remaining. Because not all of the issues that are encompassed in the 1-year and the 5-year equal everything that we were charged with. And so looking at, temperature requirements and things or recommendations for potential closure or, if there's a climate emergency or a HVAC emergency, like, what kind of criteria do we want to recommend? Those are things that we could be thinking about and looking at as well. And also really for the 1-year program and the 5-year program that we have now, making sure that we take away any barriers to implementation and making sure that people have all of the questions answered as they go about this. Because I get feedback from a lot of municipalities saying, oh, we're a little unclear about exactly what we have to do and who do we submit it to, and making sure that there's a way for that information to get out there to encourage compliance with this and to help the program be successful, I think is probably, you know, our ongoing role in having this this task force enabled. So I would leave that there.
I thanks, Matt. Matt, nice to see you. Been a while. I know that it was explicitly spelled out in the original legislation, the things like the optimal humidity and temperature ranges, the threshold for what would be an emergency condition, things like that. And I do think over the past several years, we have actually talked about those things, and it has been difficult to come up with precise like definitions for those particular areas, but I'm happy to talk about them again. If I remember correctly from DPH, their sense last time we talked about this, and Ivan, please correct me if I am misremembering, was more those things are about comfort and less about health and safety. And if we have health and safety parameters, I would love to talk about those if DPH feels like those are things that we could put out there. I think we had hesitations around school closure, around temperature, humidity, but I do think the emergency conditions is something that is probably helpful for districts to have an understanding of. As you all know, I come from a district that had a building emergency that had to be shut down, torn down, you know, and then people suffer just lifelong health impacts from that. So I don't want to conflate those two things, and I think it's important that we talk about them separately. But I do think districts would probably find that sort of information as a guide to be helpful around temperature, humidity standards, and then definitely to know what is the thresholds that really trigger an emergency. And so, Ivan, I don't want to put you on the spot. I didn't ask you in advance to respond to that, but if you have any thoughts or anyone else has thoughts on that, of course, um, please feel free to share.
I know that there's been some work, certainly in California and also on a national level about heat emergency and OSHA getting involved with extreme heat events. I would imagine if I don't believe that that got full traction and implemented on a federal level. I think that California did do some stuff with heat emergency stuff. That was particularly for people working outdoors and trying to protect a lot of those workers, so that if there was, you know, 100-degree day, that they would have to provide a way for a cool down spot or an extra break or something like that. And I think that that's something that, you know, as a group, we might want to explore as a recommendation. Because really, if we say that people can't work outside when it's 100 degrees, it's going to be hard to learn if the classroom is 100 degrees as well. And I don't know exactly what that number needs to be, but I know that it's not really defined. I think the only thing that's currently defined in our legislation is that if there's no heat inside of a building and if the temperature is on the lowest point, then yeah, well, we can't do anything if the boiler's broken and, you know, everybody's got to try and wear a jacket in the classroom. So I would imagine that on the upper end of that spectrum as well might be something that we could consider and certainly talk about and debate. Maybe not today, but, you know, as part of the overall charge, I think that's something that we should continue to pay attention to.
So think, especially around the emergency protocols, I would think like the mold, like particles per whatever volume of measurement, it likely does exist, but might be something that would be helpful for us to highlight so that schools have an easier access to that information. And another sort of question for our consideration that I had received was around establishing sort of best practices, both in terms of like protocols for people to request uh, an investigation or express concerns about something, and then also best practices around system maintenance for districts. And so I don't know if anyone, hi, Senator, good to see you, has thoughts on that.
Hi, I'm gonna keep, I'm sorry I'm so late. I'm walking to my car, so I'll keep on mute.
No problem.
So I can chime in a little bit from before, since I think you're probably looking for a response from DPH. So it's been a little while since we've talked about these things. And this goes back to the, questions as you're bringing up before about, whether it's a comfort issue or really kind of more a, something that would be regulated by public health specifically. And there's also kind of a gray area in between as well. So when we're talking about also, ideal, as Matt brought up, like the ideal learning environment, I think that also gets into kind of comfort, and like absolutely, like that's kind of what we mean by that when when the conditions are outside of what's typically considered comfortable, and that's a lot of times in line with kind of the OSHRA standards in terms of typical kind of like the HVAC kind of guidance. There are more people who are uncomfortable. It's always a spectrum, right? So no matter what, there's always going to be some people who are uncomfortable even in what's considered optimal temperature, and vice versa, really. So when we're talking about also what's one thing I do want to kind of change a little bit, though, is we're talking about what's unsafe inside and outside. Those aren't really necessarily interchangeable, because there are other factors, and they are related, though, even and it does get very complex, and that's why, like, also we try not we don't want to necessarily regulate every aspect of this, because even with the standards, if you get into them, it's a lot more than just the temperature. They also talk about like how close are people basically near windows and things, because even sunlight can be a huge factor in terms of how much kind of like thermal load is not just in the classroom, but also like affecting individuals as well. So some people might have direct exposure to sunlight if they're right next to the window, and that could impact them a lot. And that's something that also affects outdoor workers a lot. So that's also why there are other factors and guidance that we give in general for workers, including, making sure there's, plenty of shade, and taking breaks and so forth. Otherwise, the risk increases, obviously, if people are working in direct light, and schools are the same thing. There's a lot of mitigating factors that can be taken. And if those factors aren't available, then it's a higher risk environment. So for instance, if, there's not water in the school, that's a huge problem, because water is one of the best ways to mitigate with higher heat. So we do, I do like to kind of caution from some of the as before, like some of the attempts to necessarily close the schools. I think in the past I've mentioned issues, the schools have to be open a certain number of days, and the home environment isn't necessarily always better. It can actually be worse. In certain communities, you have stack effects, where people on higher floors, for instance, have a lot of heat, and they may not have AC. So it could be a lot worse in the community too. So we can't assume that one is better than the other. So there's a lot of things that need to be weighed carefully, and I think these are decisions that are often made with local health. Now, we have recently create a web page too that has additional information for schools. So on our, on the Connecticut Department of Public Health website, we have some information that, it's meant to support the Department of Labor's work by, with the form. And it also gets into some of these issues, as you mentioned, mold that is, closely related to temperature and humidity. So we have a direct link to mold there because there's obviously a lot of information that gets into, specific topics like mold. And we reference the EPA resources, which are still kind of the main standard from which this comes from. And we also get into like the specific comfort ranges that we had discussed in the past, like the agency's position on that, which includes, ultimately, having the local health department involved as part of the decision-making process, because it isn't simple, and there can be a lot of things that can be done, and we just we want them to be like at the table and not excluded from it, because it's something that there isn't necessarily one fit rule, and that's also why I think this issue, I know it's, it'd be easy if there was like a specific number and everybody wants something that you could just point to, but I think that's also why it's been hard nationally is, it's not a simple topic, and, Department of Labor and OSHA have been working on this for decades, and we've come closer to doing that for work, but there's been pushback on each way because it's not so simple, and there's a lot of considerations. So yeah, I know that was a long answer, but I'll let other people interject.
Does anyone have anything? Joni, nice to see you.
Hi, nice to see everybody. I just want to add just a couple things. I understand, logistically it's difficult to come up with those standards, and I totally understand everything where the public health department is coming from. As a teacher who was formerly working in a school without air conditioning, I just want to stress the importance, like temperature standards is something I'm really passionate about that I think really needs to be addressed. I don't know how they came up with the minimum standard, but we do have a minimum standard for a cold temperature. So I think in some way it's got to be feasible to come up with some sort of maximum temperature. I know, the word is just kind of used, but it does drive me a little nuts when we use the word comfort temperature, because it is so beyond a comfort thing. We're talking about students and staff literally passing out, which raises its own issues of the danger of falls and everything else. So besides just mold, there's a safety issue of how it's affecting students in that aspect as well. Students with asthma, where that heat and that humidity makes it very difficult for them to breathe. I know some of the cold standards came about because of I believe the cold standards came about because, science shows that being cold can really affect your ability to think and to your brain to function properly. But I definitely think that that's something that really needs to be considered, and that I'm particularly passionate about. So I just wanted to add my thoughts in there.
And we do have that optimal temperature range, remember, which is between 65 and 80. So it's not like it was a free for all at all. It's just more that it's a question of exactly how to regulate. And again, it's complex. It's oftentimes there's other decisions that are made. For instance, local health may say you might not be able to use the top floor of this building, or you might not be able to use the gymnasium. But you can use these other buildings that are, maybe these other rooms have cross ventilation because they're better engineered so that they have a really nice breeze that goes through them, and they stay pretty cool because they're in the shade. There's a lot of other kind of considerations that are really kind of case by case. So I think that's kind of where that kind of comes down to a little bit from that perspective. And so I know it's been a while since we've talked about these things.
Why don't I go to Lou and then I'll come to you, Matt? Go ahead, Lou.
I'll go quick. Technically, Matt got his hand up before I did.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But just very, very quickly, and just a general comment to the extent that it's helpful. I mean, it occurs to me that there's a number of things that are on that list that are all varying levels of complexity. Completely understand what you're saying, Ivan, and I'm struck with the sense that regardless if we could all agree on what the priorities are, I don't think we'll be able to answer all those questions with the limited time we have for this call. So to me, it seems more a conversation about what's left on the list and perhaps kind of prioritizing some of these items for discussion. Would be my suggestion as to how to kind of approach that list. Because I do agree with Joni that the temperature standard piece is important to us simply because of the fact I think we found ourselves in this situation for so long because there was nothing to enforce. And so having that standard in place is critical for me. And Ivan, I think it's less about figuring out how to implement and ensure accountability on that, and more kind of figuring out what does it look like to have this comfort range, where is that articulated and where can we point to it? Those kinds of things I think are important. But with that said, that may not be the most important thing on this list for us to be spending our time on. So that was my 2 cents. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Lou. Matt?
Yeah, I'll kind of yes and with Lou. And Joni, I certainly sympathize with you, and certainly nobody wants kids passing out in there. But I also understand what Ivan says about it being really site dependent, right? And so being able to I think really what we're trying to talk about is what were all of our tasks as the working group that we were going to be charged with. And maybe, the recommendation is, where it's recommended to stay within the optimal temp. And I think the reason why there was just rules on the lower end is because everybody has heat and not everybody has air conditioning. And so if you say, hey, we have to send everybody home if it gets to 90 degrees in the classroom, well, all of the ones that don't have AC are going to close their schools for 2 months out of the year. That's probably, not optimal, right? We can't really force everybody to get AC. So, local recommendations notwithstanding, I think as long as we meet our charge and say, okay, well, what is that? So the consensus is, we would recommend that it stays within this. There's not, I don't think we necessarily have a path to recommend that the legislature mandate that without a little further investigation and work on everything. But certainly, alongside the guidance of DPH, just to say that we can check that box, and we have addressed that, and we've gone through all of these things. And I don't know that we need to, like Lou said, go through every single one of them, at length right now, but trying to just make sure that we are thinking about all of the things that we were asked to do initially is I think where we should be thinking.
Thanks, Matt. I appreciate that. Senator Kushner, you had your hand up, but then back down. Did you want to say anything?
I did have my hand up because I started thinking about this, and I hope, Ivan, can you be really brief in answering this question I have, because I don't want to get off track, but I was thinking, is there anything that requires schools or would it be wise to require schools to have a heat plan? Because we know it's going to happen every year, and we know which schools don't have air conditioning. And you describe some of the things that might mitigate some of the heat problems, like whether you're in the shade or whether you're have cross ventilation. Would it make sense for us to say every school has to have a plan for what happens when it gets over 80 degrees in the classroom?
It's interesting. So I don't know. Well, I think we should discuss that more. You asked me to come up with a really quick response, and I don't know if I have like an immediate response. I mean, I'm not sure. I think that might be something that the schools would want to, the schools might want to be at the table with too, in terms of what that would involve from, what that would require from them, and if every school would need to do it, or, what is a school even is a big question too, right? Because there's a pretty big range of what schools might fall into that category, and what might be exempt, and so forth. And just because there's a huge range of what we kind of call schools in the state, and which ones where that might be more relevant and not. But it's an interesting point of, are there, should there be more of a planned kind of ahead of time, and or is there another alternate situation, including how aware are they of all the other mitigating strategies, and what's their ability to implement some of those? And that can include, things like making sure everybody's well hydrated, wet towels on the neck. I mean, there's so many different things that can be used. They're not ideal. Obviously having, I think everyone would agree that the best is to have a really nice buildings that are easy to control with temperature, and well insulated, and have AC. But in the meantime, till we get to that point, like what do we do? And I think it's a good question. I don't know. I think that's a question for the group too.
I
And
think that
I think Ivan brings up, like, I think there's freezing points. And I know for me, with a sickle cell population, you have very clear physician orders. I don't really see physician orders for heat. For example, my sickle cell kids wouldn't go out below 40 degrees. So I think Ivan's trying to walk a line. We don't have a clear sign. We know where we freeze, but we don't totally know people's threshold for heat. It's a little variable. I don't see that on a lot of physician orders in the school.
And it varies too, because for everybody, acclimation is a huge part of that too, which is a huge thing to consider, which is, if you haven't been exposed to heat, and then you're suddenly exposed to a major heat wave, it's a much bigger deal than if we're kind of slowly exposed over time to increasing temperatures with like natural seasons. So when there's major fluctuations in temperatures, that in shifts, that can kind of be tougher on our systems.
And I said at the outset that the reason why I asked for a quick answer, Ivan, was only because I didn't want to derail the meeting. But maybe that's something we put on the agenda. I know I will say that there's been a lot more discussion in recent years, in the last couple of years, a lot more discussion about heat exposure for workers. And so we are becoming more and more aware of how serious this is in a workplace consideration. I think equally so in a learning situation, both for the workers in that situation, but imagine for the students. So maybe we just put that on a list to come back to.
Yeah, I mean, as I look at this, it seems like we're kind of going back and forth discussing various aspects of subsection 1 and 2. So number 1 being optimal humidity and temperature ranges, which we've begun to establish with the guideline, the optimal temperature guideline. And then number 2 being the threshold school air quality emergency conditions warranting temporary school closures. So there's a little bit of a debate around that. I feel like both of these can probably go into a parking lot. And perhaps what makes more sense is for us to start by tackling like some of this. Number 3, criteria for the rating, for the priority rating of heating, ventilation, air conditioning, repair, and remediation needs. And then number 4, optimal heating, ventilation, and air conditioning system performance benchmarks. Then
Well, I could say on number 3, you know, figuring out what the need is going to happen when everybody starts getting their 5-year tests done. And we really start to understand the scope of what's needed for repair and remediation. And number 4 is really the current ASHRAE standards pretty much dictate, you know, what we're benchmarking against. But as people get into the 1 year and the 5 year, and you start seeing the surveys come back, and if you find that the surveys say that, boy, 50% of the schools have big problems, that everybody's complaining in the school about their indoor air quality, then we know it's a big issue that needs to be dealt with. When all of the 5-year studies come back, and if we kind of aggregate all of that data and say that 20, 30, 40% of the classrooms don't meet ventilation guidelines, then we know that that's a bigger issue to deal with. If there's only a few percent, that fail, so to speak, that don't meet that criteria, well, boy, that's great. We're doing a good job. But, once we start getting all of those survey results, I think is when we're going to be able to have a better handle on what needs to be done to fix it.
Thank you, guys. I feel like we could probably talk about this for a really long time. And I will say this conversation reminds me of what happened last time we talked about this. But it's really difficult to find really precise guidelines, and it's really complicated. And then even if we can determine what the guidelines are, it's really difficult to tell districts what they should do with their students, because it's hard to know whether or not if you were to close schools, those kids would then be in an environment that's any better than the school setting. So I'm happy to continue this conversation. I do think part of why we didn't have definitive answers for these tricky questions is because they are in fact quite difficult to tackle. But I'm glad we were able to discuss it, and I think we now also have some future items for discussion. And we didn't get to sort of best practices and protocols for receiving and investigating complaints or concerns, or best practices for maintenance, but perhaps those could also be some future agenda items for us to discuss if folks feel like those are helpful topics for districts.
I wonder, and this is just an idea, and you feel free to throw it right back at me if it doesn't make sense, but I wonder if it makes sense to have maybe one or two subcommittees that can kind of work on some of those things offline, and maybe come up with some recommendations for the working group to consider. But you all are the chairs, so that's, your call. But that might be one way to kind of tackle this.
Sure, Julie, Senator Kushner and I can talk about if that makes sense, and if we have folks who are interested in doing that work. All right, so we will put a pin in those items and consider them for additional future conversation, and move on to an update on the 1-year inspection forms. Matt, is that you to give us an update on those, or?
I could give you a little bit of one. I know, so, DAS did a fantastic job with researching all of the things that are in Tools for Schools. And certainly their wheelhouse is not indoor air quality and that type of thing. So I think what happened was, it seems as though DAS kind of grabbed all of the stuff that they could find, the forms that were on EPA's Tools for Schools. And I think it's important to note that EPA's Tools for Schools is not a prescriptive program. It's an encompassing program. It's an umbrella. And so I think the best thing we could do for clarity on the forms that are available is to have a couple of subject matter experts work with DAS and make sure that it seems most appropriate for our legislation in Connecticut. Because, for example, a lot of the information that is on a ventilation form from Tools for Schools is also included specifically in our 5-year testing protocol. And so being able to not overwhelm the districts by saying, oh, you have to fill out all these forms. And I get calls from districts sometimes saying, hey, we got to go through and test all of these air handling units. I'm like, no, that's what you're doing on your 5-year thing. You know, kind of customizing it, those forms a little bit to our legislation and to our programs, because Tools for Schools, again, is not prescriptive. It's not like you have to check off everything. We said modeled on Tools for Schools, right? I believe in the legislation, not because Tools for Schools isn't an exacting program, right? It's encompassing, it's an umbrella. And so just having some subject matter experts work with DAS, who's the people who it is their wheelhouse, to help out and give a little guidance, to take some of that load off of DAS that just says, oh, I know that we have to provide the forms to people and we want to put them on the website for everybody. Again, they did a great job for administrative services as opposed to technical engineering folks.
Can I respond to that?
Of course.
Thank you. So Matt, going back to your point about modeled after Tools for Schools, the statute specifically says it requires districts to use Tools for Schools. So they have to use that program, and then following that, I don't have it up right now, but following that there's a list of different things that they should be looking for. So we worked with DPH to identify, okay, using Tools for Schools, these are the 6 checklists that meet that statutory requirement, meet like ventilation, or I think we used like a building maintenance because there were other specifics in the statute that had to do with the building maintenance piece. So we matched up the criteria in the statute to those 6 specific checklists, and our colleagues at DPH helped us with that. I hear your feedback and willing to work on any recommendations that you might have, but what we've done right now meets the statutory requirement for us and for school districts, so they're not missing anything.
Thanks, Melissa. That's really good feedback. I think that there might be a little ambiguity in the interpretation of the statute, right? You're absolutely right that we said Tools for Schools, and I think what's not explicitly stated in the legislation is that Tools for Schools is not prescriptive, and that we can still meet all of the Tools for Schools items that are in a checklist. That doesn't necessarily have to happen every year. So if you have your 5-year ventilation verification, there should be a way to say, I did my 5 years, so that covers this part of the checklist, or something along those lines, so that people don't feel they have to do all of this work every year necessarily, if the intention was that every 5 years is when we intend to do certain things. We say like radon testing is part of the indoor air requirements. That only has to happen, I believe, every 3 years. Somebody jump in if I'm wrong. However, every year that form needs to be filled out that says, did you do your radon testing? You can answer, yes, I did it last year, and still be compliant within that window. It's not like people have to redo that radon test this year just because they have to fill out that form every year. And I think there needs to be a little clarity around that. And I think that's how we could work together to help the districts and ease the burden on them.
All right. And so I guess we could talk about whether or not we should in the statutes clarify that it have to be tools for schools. That could be a further conversation. It should be modeled on a program like Tools for Schools, or if there's benefit to making any clarifications there. So definitely open to folks' feedback on that. Do we have an update on Tools for Schools implementation?
I'm guessing you're looking to me.
I wasn't specifically, but if
Okay.
you've heard, happy
can-
to have an update from you.
I mean, I can just give a few other pieces of information. So, we hosted a webinar for superintendents in October with some grant updates from our Office of Grants Administration. And at the same time, we did about a 10-minute update on the annual form requirement as well as the 5-year form requirement directly to superintendents. That webinar is available on our website. We have 172 schools who have completed their annual form this year. So that is 51 districts. We're sending out a reminder to districts to complete the annual form, the Tools for Schools, this week. So those are, I think, high-level updates from DAS in general when it comes to annual form and Tools for Schools. I don't know if you're looking for a different type of update on Tools for Schools.
No,
Anything more subject matter, I think I'd have to hand to someone else.
I think that's helpful. So 174 schools is not a lot of schools, right? I mean, it is, but we have a lot more schools than that. So I think it's helpful just to have some perspective of how uh, broadly adopted this program has been. And so if we should talk about how to make sure districts know that they need to do this and feel supported in rolling out Tools for Schools, happy to talk about that further as well.
There's some things we're doing to support that just internally through our own kind of membership. One of those aspects is really encouraging districts to form their committees, whether it be Tools for Schools committees. Some of this can also be done through health and safety committees that are already up and running. Unfortunately, Representative, once again, the issue is that there's not uniformity in terms of how districts are applying those. So there's some things that we're doing to help this along. I was also just wondering if I may ask a question, just related question to Melissa. Just wondering, do you all have a date for when is the next school facility survey supposed to be happening, and how does that overlay with the work that we're talking about with the 1 and 5 year inspections?
Thanks, Lou. We are just getting started planning for the next school facility survey. So if anyone doesn't know what that is a 5-year or a survey we're required to do once every 5 years. We did the last one in 2021 with a report that came out in 2022. So we're planning to do the next one in 2026 with a report to come out sometime in 2027. We're really just gearing up for it right now. So we have someone on our team who's been reviewing the laws for the school facility survey to match up what we did last time versus what we're required to do, versus what might actually be helpful to us at DAS or any of our sister agencies, SDE, OPM. I know DPH is here as well. And we'll be happy to bring you into the fold when we're a little bit further along with planning for this. Feel free to reach out if you have any thoughts or want to be more involved.
Thank you.
All right. I don't know really if there's an update, Melissa, on the grants, because there's not really HVAC grants anymore. It's just been folded into the school construction reimbursement program. So I don't know if you just want to talk about how that's been going, if you've gotten any applications yet, specifically
Yes.
for HVAC.
Yeah, so I have a few points I can share. In the first two rounds of the program, we awarded 178 million, just reminding everyone. We've made 31 million in payments so far. That's to 163 schools statewide. And then we just did a survey over the summer in August. And so those grants will have an impact across 66,000 students statewide. And that doesn't even count teachers or administrators or staff who are in these schools. So we should potentially be counting that next time we do a survey. There's about 20% of the projects completed, and then the others are either nearing completion, under construction, or in a design phase. So that's the grants that we awarded in round one and round two, and data is available for those on the open data portal. Then we have this new law that went into effect, I believe it was July 1, that allows districts to apply for HVAC grants monthly as part of our administratively approved grants. So this is the non-priority list. We've only received 2 applications on that so far, just under 10 million though. So sounds like pretty impactful projects. I don't have any more details on those right now, but I can reach out to our grants team, or if you have specific questions, feel free to reach out to me. I'll reach out to our grants team.
Great. Thank you. All right, I think that's it, you guys. Does anyone have anything else they want to ask or share or ask for us to take under consideration going forward that we haven't discussed yet?
I have a question for Melissa. When does the portal go live for people to do the 5-year sign off? Would that be the first of the year?
I had some feedback from Lou, and we updated it on our website to tell schools that it's already live.
Oh, great.
So it's been open, I think, for a year now, maybe, because we had all these changes in dates, right? It was 2024, then we pushed it to 2026. It's open, and there are some districts who've submitted their form to say that they've done their 5-year evaluation and inspection.
Good news. Thank you.
And Matt, I want to respond and say I heard your feedback about the annual form. And if you ever want to talk one-on-one about some of the details of the statute, or if you want to give some feedback on making improvements, we are willing to listen to that.
That's great. Thank you. You know, certainly we want to work together. We know that's not your necessary area of expertise, but I also know that you guys look at it very focused on making sure that it's compliant with the legislation. And I admire that. I think that it's good overall. It's justifiable. We want to make sure that we make it as easy as possible for everybody to comply and make sure that the intentions are being met. But yeah, I'm happy to reach out offline and continue the conversation.
Sounds good. And we haven't heard questions in a couple of months now on that piece either. Thanks, Rep. Lever, Senator Kushner, for the space.
Thank you, as always. Senator Kushner, do you have any closing remarks?
No, I really appreciate everyone. It's good to see everybody, for one thing. It feels like it's been a while. But I appreciate that we're getting started on these conversations again, and look forward to the next meeting. And as always, Rep. Lieber, you've done a magnificent job chairing today. Thank you.
No problem. Thanks, everyone. And then, of course, if you have other thoughts, things you'd like for us to tackle or discuss, you can always reach out to Senator Kushner and I in between meetings. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Happy holidays, everyone.